Good morning. I'm sorry for the late start this morning. I had to swap computers because I had one that was malfunctioning. I'm sorry to keep you waiting, and thank you very much for sticking with us as we attempt to go live. I'm still having trouble with the chat room, so I'm just going to talk until I get some feedback from you in the hope that this will be interesting. The reason why we run webinars on how to manage and contract your VAs is because it's a bit of a Wild West going on out there. You'll be taught work on your business, not in it, and that means that at some point or another you have to start paying other people. The problem is that not all VAs are the same, and this creates a kind of bounce effect in your business. You get really excited, you get someone to help you, you set them up, and then it doesn't necessarily work. Now, if I talk to business owners, some will say the VA I've got is the best thing since sliced bread. Others will say, I used a VA and I'm never going to do it again. What is going on? Well, the first thing that's going on is that a virtual assistant or VA means different things to different people. If you look at virtual assistant websites, you will see that some specialize in social media support. Others are great at design and copy and typing. Some offer diary services. Others even go so far as bookkeeping. The problem is that one individual VA is highly unlikely to be skilled in all of those things to the same extent. You know yourself that we all have strengths and weaknesses, and we all have things we love to do and things we hate to do. Now, if you're thinking a VA is going to cure all your admin problems and do absolutely everything you want, then you need to be very clear that you need an all-rounder. Because most people who are brilliant at social media are not necessarily brilliant at bookkeeping. Why does this matter? Because your VA will charge you by the hour. Even if you're on a retainer, that will be a budget for the time that he or she is going to devote to you. If you use that time by asking them to do things they're not very good at, then you can find you run out of time or you incur extra charges and the job still isn't done. We're all a bit naive when it comes to selecting a VA. Every time I ask someone, how would you find a VA? I get one of two answers. The first one is, I'd ask around and ask my business associates. Now, that's a brilliant place to start, and I highly recommend that you get testimonials and references for the VAs you're thinking about hiring. But if the person is using a VA primarily to do financial admin and you are looking for a VA primarily to do social media admin, that VA may not be the best fit for you. Even if you're much more specific and you start saying, okay, I want a VA who's going to be good at the following things. There's another trick a lot of people miss. I strongly urge you to ask the people who are recommending VAs to you to tell you what they do to make the relationship work, how they brief that VA, how they get them to report back, and how they account for time and money. The reason I'm saying this is a lot of people who use VAs have no real way of monitoring how effective the VA is. Why does that matter? Well, if your VA is in a client-facing role, it matters a lot. You may think that your VA is wonderful, but if your clients find them to be inefficient or non-responsive, that's going to very badly affect your business. In a finance-facing role, if your VA is taking 10 times as long to do something that frankly you should have automated rather than paid a person to do, you'll be paying for the service and getting the service, but your business won't be getting value for money. How do you figure out what your VA should be doing? Well, there's two ways to go about it. Some of us are trusting souls and we take on a virtual assistant and we go, rescue me. If you're lucky, you'll have found yourself a virtual assistant who likes to rescue people and will set up systems for you that help you to go forward. If you're unlucky, you and your VA will just spend a lot of time going round in circles. So before you start hiring a VA, think about, what am I trying to achieve? And how do I want to communicate with my VA? And what systems are appropriate? The commonest way to manage your VA is by email, good old-fashioned email. The problem is your VA has got other customers. And if you bury them in emails, they may find it difficult to pick out what's important from what you're just telling them needs to be done sometime. I find with my own virtual assistant, regular pre-scheduled calls to pick up on what are the priorities and what is the longer term helps her to manage the day-to-day tasks in a way that's more efficient. It's very tempting to just give it all to them and leave them alone. But just as with an ordinary employee, a virtual assistant is as effective as the brief you give them. Many virtual assistants have great design capability and can also help you with documents, but be aware that very few of them are graphic designers, and if you give them complex design projects to do and they're not skilled to do it, you will use up your time and they won't have time to do the core elements of what you want them for. I often sit down and draw a circle of my business, and I start it with sales and marketing, with what I do, who I need to contact, what processes I need maintained, and I end it with finance and administration, accounting and tax. And I look at that circle and I work out, where am I spending too much time? But before I pay someone to do that work for me, I then look at, would it be better to automate it? The world of business administration has been transformed in the last 5 years. There are things I used to do by hand, and I used to pay people to do by hand, that I use automation to do now. If you've got a customer relationship management system known as the CRM, you can automate tasks and all sorts of things that once upon a time you had to handle by email. I also work with certain people in Basecamp. Basecamp is one of very many platforms where you can sit and share information. There are hazards in Basecamp though. Keep your group with your VA very small and make sure that you and your VA don't share everything all the time. Set the thing to daily digest unless you have something urgent. Otherwise, every time either of you sign off a task, you'll get an email, and that can be very irritating if you're already too busy. Think long and hard about what your VA needs access to in order to work for you and how to provide that appropriately and securely. Particularly if your VA is going to do anything to do with your finances or your customer records, you need to be aware that data protection applies. You should not just email spreadsheets of contact details to your VA. Sending personal data that's not secure through the internet is not only probably a breach of the Data Protection Act, and by the way, each record you send like that is a separate breach. So if you just emailed your VA 1,000 names, that's a lot of breaches, and that is £100 per breach if someone finds out about it. But it's also very difficult for your VA to work effectively. Look for ways to collaborate on platforms that you control. We ourselves use Capsule because we can give people view-only access without them being able to download the data. Now, I trust my VA completely, and I have properly contracted with her for confidentiality and data security. But the fact remains, it's my job to set up systems that are secure. And if you are relying on someone else's integrity to protect your customer data, things can go very wrong. I'm not suggesting for a moment that you should not trust the people that you pay, but I'm suggesting that in addition to properly selecting people who are worthy of your trust, you set up arrangements within your software that mean you control your data anyway. For highly sensitive data on the client front, where we do hold sensitive data in our line of work, which is employment law and HR, we use secure systems such as Microsoft 365, where we make sure that our general administration team have absolutely no access to what we are doing for individual clients, because they do not need to know. What country should your VA be in? A lot of people get very enthusiastic about hiring Filipino VAs or VAs in India, and there is a simple reason for this. Generally speaking, their hourly rate will be far cheaper than any rate you can get quoted in the UK. Be aware, however, that if you are sending data outside the EU, that is your client's personal data, you need to do a lot more than hire a VA and hope for the best. If you look at the Information Commissioner's website, you will see that you have to do an analysis of why this is necessary and why you can't hold the data in the UK. You need to contract with your VA that this is properly and securely held, and you need to make sure the systems at their end are secure. And you also need to make sure, if the country is outside the EU, that they have proper data safe harbor protocols, such as many organizations in the US do. You've probably heard this jargon. If you don't do this, you can find the money you saved on having a cheaper hourly rate VA is absorbed into customer complaints when the Russian mafia or Nairobi-based scammers start phoning them. Now, you might say, even if it did happen, how would we know, and how would the customers know? Well, they might do, because lots of people like me create one-off use email addresses when we're working with people. So if you share that address and that goes wild into the scamming world, I will know it was you. Some business users are far more data savvy than others, and if you become known as someone who doesn't properly handle data, it can harm your business. Be aware of the fact that VAs in the UK, unless they're billing you through a limited company, may be classified as workers. What do I mean by a worker? We all work. Well, in employment law terms, there are employees and employers, and you know that. But there's a third group called workers, and these are individuals who are contracted to provide services in person. So if you contract with Jane Smith or John Brown to be your VA, the chances are they are going to be your worker, unless the contract allows them to substitute, and indeed they do send substitutes from time to time. What this means is that your VA has a right to statutory holiday pay if they're based in the UK. They have a right to national minimum wage, but I very much doubt you'd get a UK VA for anything near it. But they also have a full set of discrimination rights, which means that, to all intents and purposes, they have lots of employment rights, even though they are not your employee. If you are using a limited company, then the VA will be the employee of that company. But be aware of the fact that if this is a service company that has only one person in it, i.e. your VA, the taxman may come to you and ask you to deduct tax anyway from the money you pay them under a scheme called IR35. I speak to people a lot about IR35, even though I'm not an accountant. And I'm going to say to you what I say to them. If you've got an accountant and you're paying people who are one-person companies on a regular basis, go speak to them. You really do need to understand what it means. If the people you pay are one person but not companies, be careful how you manage and contract them. I meet entrepreneurs at every networking event I go to who say to me, no worries, my virtual assistant is self-employed. And I go, how do you know that? And they go, because they invoice me. If you are relying on the fact they invoice you to prove to the revenue that they are not an employee, you are in for a nasty surprise. Quite often this takes several years, and pay-as-you-earn inspections are not that frequent, but you do run the risk of the revenue picking up on these payments, and then they will not be convinced by the invoice alone. What they like to see is that the person is genuinely running a business. Now, the tests the Inland Revenue use are a bit out of date, if the truth be known. They're not really with us in the virtual world. They look at who's providing the equipment. So if it's your equipment and they're coming to your premises, that will be a tick in the employment box. They also look at whose premises people work on. But obviously in the virtual world, an employee or a freelancer are as likely to work at their desk as they are at yours. They look at who is risking if this goes wrong. For example, are they investing in marketing, social media, their own website? But the truth is, if all they're doing is coming to your office for X hours a week and they're not marketing, they don't have business cards, they don't have their own phone numbers, the Inland Revenue is going to view them as an employee. Sometimes we get in a muddle about this. As business people, we have been to hundreds of seminars where people say, I really believed in this. No one believed I could do it, but I triumphed and I was right. We never ever hear from the hundreds of people who didn't follow good advice, who didn't triumph and weren't right, because no one invites them to speak at success seminars. Be careful who you take advice from on who is a freelancer and who isn't. There's a lot of pub logic going on here. I've heard people say they must be running their own business because they've got more than one client. Well, you could have a Saturday job at Tesco's and a Wednesday job at Sainsbury's, and that wouldn't mean of itself that you were running your own business. You kind of know it, but one of the tests the revenue use is how is the relationship conducted. So if they need your permission to go on holiday, if they can't organise a substitute if they're overbooked, and if they're using your premises and your equipment, does this sound as if they're running their own business? Now, many virtual assistants are genuinely running their own business. They have multiple accounts, they have their own websites, their own limited companies, and they invoice you. And some even have VAs of their own that they pay so that they're leading a team. And this is absolutely fabulous for you. But be aware of the fact that some VA organisations are not that professional. They themselves will not have set up secure data systems with the people they're paying to service you. Now, you may say, why should I care? But ultimately, if your customer data leaks into the wrong hands and it traces back to you, if you haven't taken proper steps to attempt to secure your data, the liability is going to rest with you. And simply saying I subcontracted it is not enough. Now, there are some great VA organisations out there, and I've come across them who audit their VA's equipment, who make sure it's securely held, and know what sort of working environment those people are working in. But bear in mind, if someone's working from home, it's entirely possible they could be working from their kitchen table. And your entire spreadsheet that you just merrily emailed them of all the clients' emails and who owes you money and what's going on could be on widescreen in their living room while visitors are coming round to play. Now, not all of those visitors will be unscrupulous, but it only takes one. And if you're dealing with anything sensitive, children, medical records, legal issues, credit card details, you need to go way beyond hope before you share that data. You can set up systems which give layers of access, and if your VAs are only doing diary admin for you, there is absolutely no reason to give them access to anything other than your diary system. Have a think about what goes on. Now, unfortunately, I can't get into the chat room today, so I can't take questions from you. But if you tweet me at Annabelle K on Twitter, that's ANNABELKAYE, I will be happy to answer your questions after the live broadcast element of this is over. Now, if you are already using a VA, the question I want to put to you is, what kind of contract have you got with them? You need to be aware that even if they're genuinely in their own business, they will own the copyright in the work they create for you unless you have contracted otherwise. Let me say this again. The VA will own the copyright unless you have contracted otherwise. That is the exact opposite of employment, when you own the copyright in the work that your employees have produced for you as part of their job. The world of freelance, the virtual world, is very, very different. And we often take our employee head from when we used to have a boss into our boss head and apply that to when we pay freelancers. The truth is, the default legal situation for freelancers is very different. Not only do freelancers have a range discussed, but because they are out on their own, you don't have the rights that employment law gives you. Now, it sounds unconventional, but employment law does give bosses a number of rights. But as a customer of a freelance VA, you as a business do not have any default rights. You're thinking consumer. If I enter into a contract and everything's not as it seems, I can get out of it. But in the world of business, there is no consumer protection. B2B, as it is known, is entirely regulated by the contract, with a little bit around the edges for fraud and trading standards. But what that means is you need to be very clear about what you're buying in terms of rights. You need a proper data return process and a sign-off process on your work, and you need to contract that your VA is not storing data anywhere that you haven't authorized or in a way that isn't appropriate. There is no legal default for getting this right. If you don't get it right, the buck stops with you, and you're not going to be able to persuade angry customers or the Information Commissioner that you just thought someone else was handling it. Now, the copyright side is really important, because if your VA is creating stuff, for example, it's not unheard of for VAs in our organisation to create flyers to support events we're going to. You may discover that that's the best flyer you ever had, and you may want to use it forever. Sometime down the road, you may want to sell your business, and all those things will have been incorporated into your business process and your intellectual property and your asset base. When someone comes to you, they're going to do due diligence. And if they find out that you don't own the copyrights in the fundamental materials that you need to run your business, you may find them dropping the price or even backing off. Now, I know not everyone who is running a business is thinking about selling it. Though if you talk to people who've got a lot of money, they would tell you to design your business so you can sell it, even if you're not planning to sell it today. But you do need to understand that all business relationships come to an end. Your virtual assistant is not going to work for you forever. They set up their own business and went freelance for a reason, and the chances are at some point your relationship will end. Either you'll want a new VA with a different set of skills because your business has moved on. They may want different customers with a different attitude to how things are done. It's inevitable. So what plan have you made for ending this relationship? Chances are, if you're like most of my customers, the answer is none whatsoever. We're very good at beginnings, aren't we? We go out, we find someone, we interview them, we decide we like them, we get them set up, we get very excited, we tell them all about our business, but we don't plan an ending. That can be most unfortunate. If you don't have a contractual right to get the data they created on their machines back, you can lose a significant amount of the benefit that your VA could bring, particularly if they're doing things you hoped would last. If you're asking your VA to create great customer relationships, you may want to make sure that they can't contact your customers when they are no longer your VA. Now, people say to me, you take a dim view of the world of virtual assistants, and there is a reason for that. I mostly hear from people who aren't happy. The truth is, there are hundreds of people, thousands of people who are perfectly happy with their VA. They may be happy with the performance, but they probably still haven't secured the contractual rights they need. But I'm not trying to scare you, but you do realise that the taxman can come back on you if they decide that your VA was really employed, and you're going to have issues if you're just trading on a handshake. Now, we live in a virtual world, and people say to me all the time, wouldn't it insult my VA if I gave them a contract? Well, you know, mine's on a contract and she didn't feel insulted at all. A lot depends on how you issue the contract that you're giving to your VA. If you just chuck it at them and say, sign this, particularly if they've been working for you for a long time, it's bound to cause offence. But if you do it, first of all, you take them on and go, this is our standard process. I want you to have a look at this document. And if there's anything that you object to or is going to cause problems in our relationship, let me know. You will very quickly find out the bits your VA has problems with. Now, why do you need to find this out? The other day, a friend of mine was getting a VA to sign a contract that we had produced. And you know we write VA contracts. And they were going through and they got stuck on the not contacting the customers after the contract is ended. Because the VA said, oh, I was going to pitch my services to all of them. Now, some people wouldn't mind, and other people would mind deeply, particularly bearing in mind that our customers don't deal with us, so third parties can pitch to them. It started a very useful and positive conversation about what the customer data was for and what the expectations were post the end of the relationship. If they hadn't had that, they could have had a major falling out towards the end, and my friend could have been in difficulties explaining to her customers how it is that a third party was calling them and seemed to have all this information. If you feel that contracts are inherently hostile in some way, then you've been probably signing or not signing the sort of thing that with respect to typical solicitor produces. I'm not talking about something that's the hereto unto's wheretofore stuff that we see all too much of. I'm talking about something that sets out in plain English what each of you needs, what each of you can't have, and what's going to happen about tax and money, and what's going to happen when it ends. You can bed into this process as well ways of measuring what you feel is successful. Now, a lot of this will depend on what you're asking your VA to do, but I am quite staggered by how many businesses, when I ask them, how do you measure your VA's performance, go, I don't. Now, it's lovely to have a charming and efficient VA, but even the most efficient VA, you need to keep an eye on because we are all human. There is a difference between delegating a task and abandoning it. And you need to have some simple measures in place to make sure that your VA is acting in the way that you feel is appropriate. For example, if you are giving your VA diary management tasks, which means they will have direct access to your clients and the people you want to see, it might be wise to phone a few of your closest clients or the friends that they are booking appointments with to ask how that was. Why am I saying that? Because I had a terrible year the year before last trying to book appointments with a consultancy who used a VA. She was completely and totally inefficient. Every time I rang her and left a message, she didn't get back to me. Every time I emailed her, it would take a week, if not two, for a response, by which time the slot time I'd offered her had already been booked to something else. The net result of this was I took that business somewhere else, and it cost the consultancy that were using her, to my certain knowledge, £5,000 from me, and probably a great deal more money from other people. If they had tested with a few people from time to time, how's it going? They might have discovered that their VA was not just ignoring me, but ignoring lots of people. They've got a new VA now, and I bumped into them the other day and they said it's amazing how business has picked up this year. It must be that the recession's ending. Well, I'm sure that business is picking up for a number of people, but the real bomb that's gone under their business was having a VA who really did what was needed to be done in the way it needed to be. So if you're sitting there just assuming that everything is right, you need some simple checks and balances. This is not because you don't trust your virtual assistant, but because the boss's job is to set up the task, to ensure it's done, and to monitor it. Now, if you've got a great VA, you might be on light touch monitoring, but to be on zero touch monitoring ever is unwise. If your VA is producing material that comes through you, that's really great. But I have seen a staggering number of people use VAs for social media and allow them to post directly to their social media account. Before my current setup, I had issues with this because quite often they went out with typos or they went out at the wrong time, and this is not appropriate for the business we run. You can organize your VAs doing your social media through platforms such as, for example, Hootsuite, where they can program it all, but you get to sign it off. You can also, when you get further down the road and you know that this VA is reliable, keep an eye on the scheduled posts so that if you do see one you're not happy with or you're a bit concerned about, you can pause it or edit it yourself. Total trust is a fabulous thing. You may be able to work with one or two people in a lifetime that you never need to ask questions of and you never need to supervise. But the majority of people that you work with, you will need to keep an eye on, and VAs are not that different. Some people build entire businesses with a VA type structure. They have virtual bookkeepers, virtual assistants, virtual marketeers, and that's brilliant. The great advantage of working in that way is if you get it right, you have complete flexibility and complete scalability. The great disadvantage is if you get it wrong, you have to keep starting off new people and telling them again what the old people knew. The key to this is to do the boring thing and document your systems. Now, oddly enough, you can get your VA to do this for you, to document how he or she does things. I use a system called SweetProcess, which exists online, because we can not only document the systems, but delegate out tasks when we've got new people that go step 1, do this, step 2, do this, until they're familiar with how things work. Progressively, this means as people come and go in our virtual team, we have something to give their successors that we know will work. This means that when our business gets really busy, we can upscale rapidly without suddenly having to go, oh my goodness, I've got all these people and I've got to explain to them for hours what's going on. One of the biggest things that holds back small businesses that want to grow is the fact that the boss prepares the people side for growth too late. A virtual assistant is probably going to be your first people person these days. But if you wait till you are way too busy to recruit one properly, and way too busy to brief one properly, and way too busy to issue a contract, you're going to find the benefits of having your first virtual assistant are not as great as they would have been if you took the time. So the next time you're doing something and you're thinking, why don't I have a VA to do this for me? Why not capture it, take a screenshot, make some notes, put it in a dump file so that when you're ready to get your first VA, their first role can be to tidy them all up for you, check that they still work, and put them into some good order. And while you're doing that, why not check our Coffee Klatch site and check out our virtual assistant contracts? You can buy them once and use them for as many virtual assistants as you like. That way, you'll have it all set up. So I'm going to end our webinar now. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'm sorry we have no chat room today.